Hello, my name is Teresita Blanco, the Artsy sister, and today we're continuing with Saturnastra Chicot. No, not Chicot, we're reading a he today. And this is chapter 6. I don't mind the pain. Date year 5, month 10, day 1, 14 a.m. 2 years rolled lazily by in the village of Praga. By now, everyone in Sevilla has forgotten about the dragon incident. The new talk of the town was Ahi and Eleanor. During their first weeks of training, the townspeople were appalled by the brutality which Undine displayed towards her charges. Sure, like any medieval town, Praga had a culture of child beating. However, even they found that Undine was taking things a bit overboard. The first one to complain was Eleanor's mother. She was shocked by all of the bruises in her daughter's frail body, and her motherly indignation changed to admiration when she noticed drastic changes in her daughter's behavior. In the first week, Undine managed to beat proper hygiene into Eleanor. Undine had managed to program her using her infamous reward and punishment system, and having experience with torture, Undine knew where and how to strike in a manner which produced the most pain without scarring the body, nor wounding the bones and organs. Via this method, she changed Eleanor's habit in such a way which included personal hygiene. Needless to say, she was no longer a smelly girl, for which her mother was grateful. For the second stage of her training, Undine had Eleanor punish herself whenever she made a mistake. In doing so, she assured Eleanor would correct herself without requiring Undine's supervision. The third part of the training required more meditation on Undine's part. Still, using Eleanor's compulsory repetitive behavior, she managed to teach Eleanor simple farming and knitting and cooking during the first few months of training. Undine also instructed the mother on how to teach her daughter a new recipe or sewing pattern. At first, Eleanor's mother was reluctant, however she yielded to Undine's reasoning. As Undine explained to the mother, life is harsh and then you die. You won't live forever to protect your girl. She must learn how to be self-sufficient, or how to at least pass for a stupid girl and not a cretin. This world isn't fair, and it will kill you if you let it. Undine was always twice as harsh on Eleanor due to her own failures with Ahi. Ahi had proven to be too much for her, and whenever she would strike Ahi, he would always laugh it off. For him, the strikes felt like a combat training, and Undine even caught Ahi once playing the same game with Eleanor. And Eleanor would act as Undine, who would punish him for being a bad little boy. And the dark twisted turn of her methods were taken with Ahi, even disgusting Undine, and she decided not to use pain to punish Ahi. And today Undine was once again searching for Ahi, and in the days she planned on training him, he was always nowhere to be found in town. And most of the day she was spent looking for him, and she almost had the sneaky suspicion that he was playing hide and seek with her. This day she found him in the forest, and he was with his dragon mother and 3 other large feral dragons and 3 infants. And perched on the tree was a pudgy dragon who was watching the scene with his usual draconic curious disdain. And his mother would growl at her other 3 peers, and they in turn would purr back at her, and because of her size, Flaminka was always viewed by her kin as if she was an eternal child. And such a gathering among mothers was not too unusual among the feral kind, and they were usually sociable whenever they had young, and like humans they would converse on the latest hunting tricks, the weather, the deer population, new ore deposits, and the kids. And in all those meetings, Flaminka was always the loudest, and she was eternally offended at always being treated like a little kid even due to her size. And while the mothers argued, the dragons played games while maintaining a respectable distance from their mothers. Their games varied greatly depending on the intelligence and ingenuity of the group, and at his place fellows always varied greatly in size but not in age. The first was a large 2-year-old male drake, and the second was a hungry 6-month-old girl twice as big as Ahi. And the third was a 1-month-old male, the same size as Ahi, and together they were devouring the carcasses of 25 deer that their parents had hunted. Undine found hilarious that the drake was being intimidated by 2 dragonlings, and the drake kept circling around the other dragonlings to try to get a piece of the meat. And whenever he would get near Ahi or a dragonling would growl at him, and whenever this occurred, the drake would back away. And when he was full, he stepped back and went to clean himself in a nearby brook, and when he was done, his eyes went hollow for a second. It was the sort of blank stare one gets from a person who is measuring something. And he nodded after he came to a resolution, and he crawled on all fours and he hissed like a cat at the other two dragons, and the smallest dragon tackled at him, who nimbly landed on all fours just some distance away. And the dragon stood on two legs and making him the same height as he, and he breathed in, but he closed the dragon's mouth with his hand, and the dragon started coughing smoke and small fire embers. And he then started to claw at him to make him release him, and the battle was becoming more serious, and the dragon jumped into a nearby bush and was lost from sight. And from time to time the leaves would fall from a tree or a branch and would break under the weight of the invisible little pharaoh dragon. And 10 seconds passed while the two playfellows eagerly watched the battle, and apparently this was not a new thing. He tensed up as he waited, and his red eyes scanned the surroundings, and his nostrils sniffed the air. And suddenly he swiftly jumped to the side, and something invisible crashed against the floor, dragging the dirt and leaves across the ground. And he stood up and walked towards his invisible target, and again the leaves rustled in an undetermined spot. And the sound was followed by the snapping of teeth and the sound of small feet running across the floor. And again he would graze around searching for his target, and again the dragon would try to surprise attack him, and he would always easily dodge him. And the last time he attacked, instead of moving aside, he took a slight step back, and he grabbed at the air and used the force of the dragon's jump to hurl the beast against a nearby tree. The dragon's back broke against the bark of the tree, and he started snapping his mouth and crying most bitterly. And his mother knew no reason for his cries, but chose to ignore him. She wanted to break him out of that stupid habit of always escalating a play fight into a real battle. He felt sorry for him, went to hug him, and in response to his approach, the dragon bit down on his shoulder, and his red rose deepened into a darker velvet color as blood flowed from the injury. He simply laughed, and the dragon eventually released his mouth, and he started licking at his wound. And the dragon stretched his injured frame over the soft grass, and he waited a few minutes for his back to heal. He lay down in imitation of his rival, and he then saluted the drake, which was finally able to eat his fill of the meal. And at the moment Undine realized why he did not mind the pain, nor did every human would be able to endure such wounds with a straight face. And by the time the meal was finished, he and his rival were back to the usual play fightings, and the other fellows simply limited themselves to watching the show. And by noon the dragon had gotten bored of fighting with and at that time he started sniffing the air again, and he then exchanged meaningful glances with his rival, who nodded in response, and he then growled at the drake, which disappeared. And Undine was deeply perturbed by how all the trees in the ground around her started to shake, and it seemed to her that something massive was circling around her, and indeed the drake lacked the charm to hide his movement, and he made up for it by causing too much of a ruckus, and this made it seem like he was coming from many places at the same time. And Undine tried to flee from all of the strange noises which surrounded her, and in desperation she threw her bottles in all directions, and the smoke which emanated from the bottles eroded the trees. And the drake had enough instinct to avoid the corrosive smoke, and he allowed for his prey to think that he had escaped by letting the distance grow between them. And he had seen his mother hunt many times, and he knew his prey was always most vulnerable the second he stopped to catch his breath. And indeed, Undine stopped to catch her breath for a second when she was at the outskirts of the forest, with the town within sight, and suddenly she felt something huge that had fallen behind her, and the shockwave of the drop made her skinny body fly off the ground, and before her body struck the ground, a swift claw had gingerly wrapped itself around her waist, and while the dragon carried her back, Undine made a mental note of what she imagined were her last moments in this world. When she saw him again, she was annoyed by his domineering posturing. He was in the hollow of a tree, the same way Bersamin used to sit in his throne, and indeed the child had a striking resemblance to King Bersamin, not in looks but in mannerisms, and Undine had suspected that the child was probably the king's bastard. And she said none of this aloud or to anyone. It was simply a nagging thought in the back of her mind, which had yet to rise to the surface of her conscious mind. And the drake presented Undine to the others the same way a little girl shows off a flower to her friends. And he sniffed Undine's hair, and then he dragged her closer to the others for the other dragons to smell her. Of all of his dragons took turns smelling Undine from head to toe, and the humiliation was more than she could withstand, and she was clenching her fists in impotent fury. And he then gestured to the drake and said, "Ah." And in response, the drake released Undine, and in anger she straightened her dress and her messed up hair, and he took a branch from a nearby tree and he snapped it. And his rival stood on his hind legs and also took a tree branch in imitation of Ahi. And in perfect common tongue, Ahi said, "It is either me or the gibbet." Undine started trembling from head to toe. "And what the hell are you talking about? I don't understand what you want, brat." And when she said this, a large tree branch whipped her in the back, and she doubled over in pain as she tried to regain her breath. And the drake had acted based on his intention, and he then spoke again. "This won't do, Eleanor, start the pattern again." Undine then realized he was simply repeating the random phrases like a parrot, and he was mimicking one of her training lessons, and when he saw Undine being unresponsive, he poked her arm with a stick and said, like he's giving her a taste of her own medicine, "Come on, girl, we're not done yet. The fun has just begun." And the torturous retribution went back and forth between he and the other dragonlings, and indeed they were enjoying his new game. And by nightfall, Undine had been reduced to a bloody living corpse and too bruised to move, but not wounded enough to die. And Undine remembered the first person she had ever tortured, and how her mother's pain had made her feel warm on the inside as a child. And she had always been a sadistic lass who took pleasure in the pain of others, and for the first time she felt her own victim's pain in her flesh. And she lost consciousness when the sun came down, and the last thing she remembered was his laughter, and his laughter was unlike his previous mocking laughter. No, his laughter was a perfect mimicry of hers. And when Undine came to, she was surprised to find herself resting in the guest room of Iago's mansion, and she was even more surprised by the fact that she was in one piece, and she did not have a single bruise or scratch, and he was sitting in a rocking chair beside her bed, and he was looking at a picture book upside down, and when he saw her awake, he gave his usual apish smile, and in perfect English he said, "Don't worry, Iago, I promise I won't scar her pretty little body." Alright, so that's the end of that chapter. Bye-bye and God bless.